sometimes the best you can do is accept that you cannot accept. It can be too much if you've just come through something or you're still in something to say, well, I need to accept this and move on. That's not going to happen.
Welcome back to Happiness in Progress. I'm your host, Danielle Craig. I'm an Emmy Award-winning journalist, a mom, wife, and you know what I like to say, just a person looking for more joy in the everyday. This podcast is brought to you by the Mail Tribune. You can find more podcasts at mailtribune.com. If you like listening, make sure you click that subscribe button. I have so many good episodes coming up for you. I've worked really hard to make sure these episodes are ones that will, maybe it's bring you joy or peace or real tangible tools that you can use as we go through this rocky time that is 2020. What we're talking about today is exactly that. It has been a rocky year. There has been a lot of loss and there's been a lot of grief. And I really wanted to make sure you were equipped going into the holidays with tools on dealing with some of that loss, dealing with that grief as we head into the holidays. Today, you're going to be hearing from Katherine Ingram. She is the author of this new book, Grief Girl's Guide: How to Grieve, Why You Should, and What's in It for You. Katherine Ingram is the grief girl. She is a life transitions coach, counselor, speaker, and award-winning author of Washing the Bones, a memoir of love, loss, and transformation. In this episode, we talk about a lot of the tools that are in this book. This book is absolutely incredible. I highly suggest you get yourself a copy after this episode. But one of the things that we talk about is our expectations of the holiday, going into the holiday, handling these losses as we head into holidays. What a loss is, a lot of times we think about it as a death of a loved one. It's more than that, and we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about some of the tangible tools you can use to begin making baby steps to get to a place where you feel okay. Let's get to it. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I'm so excited to chat with you.
Oh, thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks, Danielle.
I like to, this is on video now too, so I'm just going to hold up the book as well so people can see it, because this book is so fantastic. You did such a great job. It's called Grief Girl's Guide: How to Grieve, Why You Should, and What's in It for You. So one of the first things you talk about in the book, and one of the first things I want to talk about here, because there's been so much loss in 2020, let's talk about the types of loss, because when we think about grief, I know that I automatically go to death, but loss is a lot wider than that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm so glad you asked that, because it's really important and for me to remind people that there are so many kinds of loss. There is, when we think of grief, as you say, it's pretty common. The first thought to pop in your mind is losing a loved one. But grief is precipitated by all kinds of loss. And 2020 is sort of the poster child for loss this year, because we've had, these natural disasters, the fires, we've had political unrest, we've had economic upheaval, people out of work, people losing loved ones, people getting sick. And illness is also, whether it's chronic or acute, is also a form of loss. We lose our capacity, our physical capacity, or maybe other parts of us as well. And all grief is a result of some sort of loss. Not all loss precipitates grief, but all grief comes from some kind of loss. So loss can be a death, it can be an illness, it can be a miscarriage, it can be midlife, it can be retirement. It can be your home in a disaster or something. It can be your job. It can be all manner of things.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I was thinking about as I was reading through the book was, is there an element of loss when you experience loss and you're not the same person anymore? Like the loss of oneself?
Yes. Oh, that's beautiful. That's so true. It's when you go through a major loss of the you that you were dies too. Mm-hmm. It is a kind of a loss. It's very real. It's not as visible, but the you that you were is usually quite transformed. And so there is a sense of losing oneself a little bit. And you see that the larger, the more impactful the loss, like the loss of a partner or a child, of course, or if you lose a body part, or, you're in a major accident. When I have clients that have been in major accidents and had multiple surgeries and had head traumas and all these kinds of things, there is an absolute loss of the self I used to be before it happened. And that whatever it is becomes this dividing point between the two selves. And a lot of the work that I do with clients is to help people to embrace this idea of change, because so much of suffering comes from trying to go back to who I was. And I hear that frequently. I just want to go back to who I was or what I had, which of course is not possible. But beyond being not possible, it's also not good for us. Because one of the major gifts that comes from a silver lining kind of gift that comes out of loss and grief is an opportunity to step into the next iteration of your life, the next thing that wants to happen in your life, something that you're becoming, that the loss precipitates. And to try to go back is not serving you, although that's what the heart wants usually in the moment.
One of the things I loved in the book was that you talk about, everyone talks about acceptance. Like you get to a point where you accept what has happened, but I love that you grant the permission to accept that you are not accepting what has happened. Talk to me about that a little bit.
Yeah. So one of the things I tell people is sometimes the best you can do is accept that you cannot accept. It can be too much if you've just come through something or you're still in something to say, well, I need to accept this and move on. It's not going to happen. Because when you have a major impact, a major loss in your life, it takes time for the body, for the mind, for the heart, for the spirit to metabolize that. And so usually in the first stages of horror, of shock, there's no way you're going to accept, but perhaps you can say, I just don't accept this. I'm accepting in myself right now that I cannot accept this. And that in itself is acknowledging that there can be acceptance out in some future for you, but just not at this moment, because in a way it's saying, I'm just too raw right now. I just can't talk about this or be with this right now.
I like that you can be there with how you really do feel and not have to just put on, yeah, okay, fine, I accept it, even if you don't. One of the things, let me see, I wanted to read something from here. Actually, I don't know if you can see, I've got a lot of folded pages. I know people are against that, and a lot highlighted. My kids are like, stop writing in that book. What are you doing?
I love that. Thank you.
I think I am going to read this. I loved this. You're talking about acceptance here. Quote, until you accept the facts, you are hobbled. Until you really, truly accept, you cannot move ahead because you are swallowed up by neurotic suffering, by all your crazy denial and anxiety and depression. Even though it's painful, the vulnerability of fully being with a crummy reality is strangely a lot more peaceful than trying to avoid it. Accepting your present reality is like taking a big breath and getting back to the work of living. It's flowing instead of resisting. You can only respond to life when you are standing in total truth. End quote. What's the step to go from the not accepting to the accepting so you can stand in the truth and flow?
The way to acceptance from non-acceptance is really a journey. And I know that most folks don't want to hear that. We'd all like the nice, simple, just tell me what to do and I'll do it kind of thing. But acceptance is a process. And usually what's required for that is being present in each moment, in each day, to how you're actually feeling, to what you're actually thinking, and to allow yourself to have the expression, whatever that expression is, anger, tears, fear, guilt. I'm not saying indulge in it and wallow around in it necessarily, but just to acknowledge each feeling as it comes up, each little piece of the truth of this person's gone, or I can't use my arm anymore, or, my baby, or I can't get pregnant, because infertility is also a sort of loss and grief. It's being with each feeling as it comes up without resistance, Danielle. And it is a daily walk. And then at some point, as you do that, as you just allow yourself to have whatever's coming up inside of you, whatever needs to be said, whatever you need to do, and you allow that without resistance, it moves you toward acceptance, into acceptance.
The baby steps.
Yes.
We're going to kind of come back into this as we move on, but I wanted to ask specifically about the holidays, because there has been so much loss this year, and we're heading into the holiday season. How can people start navigating this when they're having trouble affording the holiday season because they've lost a job, or they have empty seats at the table, or whatever it may be? How do we start navigating what's supposed to be a really happy time, or we think is supposed to be a happy time, and it's just not?
That's right. And that's the thing, the difference between what we think is supposed to be a happy time. So there needs to be a change in thinking about it. I think that's what's most helpful. To give yourself permission, a pass, if you will, on holidays as usual, because for so many people, as you say, this year, it is not a normal year. It is, you have lost someone, you don't have the money, you're not feeling happy, your house burned to the ground, or you're sick, or someone you love is really sick. It isn't the time to be happy, happy, happy.
I love that permission. I love it. Yes.
Right. There's this cultural thing in our country about being happy all the time as the greatest virtue. And that's just not the case. That is not true for a lot of other cultures. And it doesn't need to be true for us. Happiness is really wonderful. And I know you've got the Happiness Project. The happiness is totally rad. Everyone wants to be happy, but not at the expense of denying the real. And so if your situation is such that you are full of sorrow, you are suffering, you don't feel jolly, you don't really feel like celebrating, don't. It's okay. It's really, really okay.
I love that permission. And you know what? It's not the Happiness Project, it's Happiness in Progress. And I think so much part of it, no, that's okay. Because I think that while I want to feel happy, and part of the reason I named it this was that there's so much progression in our life. And it's not just, honestly, even in my own grief, like I lost my uncle about a month and a half ago. And within that, like my emotions were all over the place. And I had friends who were available to talk about like be with me when I'm like bawling, and then be with me when I'm laughing, and like go back and forth. And to be able to accept that was a really huge thing for me, that I felt like I didn't need to just cry, or I didn't need to just move on.
Yeah. So much of the struggle that people have that with grief and loss is our feelings and our thoughts about how we should be dealing with it, what should be happening. It's all these shoulds. And the reality almost never matches that idea of, well, I should be happy anyway, or, well, I should be over it by now, or, well, that's life and it just happens. I just should accept it. And maybe you're not feeling that way. The body knows what it needs. The heart knows what it needs. And if you can accept where you are, that you're sad today, that today's a low day. Today, I'm not going to go out. Today is not the day to buy Christmas presents, and give yourself that pass, that permission. It will be so much easier. Maybe tomorrow you'll feel, as you said, you'll be in a different mood. You'll be in a different place, because grief is not linear. Okay. Grief is not this steady line where you're sad and then every day it's a little bit better. That is just not how it works. I call it Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, because it is all over the place. It's a maverick emotion. It's full of all kinds of nuances, and it shows up differently sometimes from moment to moment. And it's all okay. And that's really important for people to realize that they can be sad or scared or depressed or angry or happy, or maybe all of those in the same day.
Yeah, I love that. And that is the progress part. That's the progress part. That's the growth and the changing and the flexibility and the stretching in the ways you don't want to stretch. So when I think about the holidays, I think grieving through the holidays is very, very difficult. And I think grieving through the holidays with children might even be a little more difficult, because maybe you place some extra, I need to make this one way for my children. Do you have any advice for the parents who are going through that?
Well, that's a good question. And I think it is good to be thoughtful. It depends on the age of the children, of course.
Mm-hmm.
If they're really little and they're not fully grasping the emotional weight of what's happening, or perhaps it's not even something they need to know about,
Mm-hmm.
Loss of income or, some illness in a family member that they don't need to be burdened with. I think it's important to do something for your children. You don't have to go all out. They don't have to have every toy they've ever wanted, but you can create a beautiful ritual. There may be a way that you can bring in, depending again on the age of the child. If they're really little, you can bring in something about what's happening in a way that they can understand it, or do something, little gesture, make a little altar at home, maybe if you've lost somebody. I know one of the things I did when I lost a spouse right at Christmas time is when my family gathered for the Christmas dinner, there was nobody happy in the room, but we gathered and we left an empty chair at the table. And that was just a little ritual, a little reminder of, let's acknowledge what's really happening. There's an elephant here. We don't need to all pretend that it didn't happen. And we're still gathered, we're still together. It's that spirit of love and family. And we're acknowledging and thinking about this person. And to acknowledge what's there, and still have some part of your ritual for your children, something that's special for them.
What was that like for you as the person who lost their spouse, as the very new widow?
Horrible.
Yeah.
unspeakably painful. Yeah. Are you speaking right about the dinner or just the whole
dinner?
Thing?
The dinner.
Oh, the dinner. It was my idea.
Okay.
I'm very much a person of ritual, and I felt it was really important. I mean, he was on my heart and in my thoughts. That's all I had. That I was filled with him. And so it was helpful for me to have that and to have my family kind of tuned into the fact of both his presence and absence, you might say, at that table. And it felt very honoring. And I was beyond sad also. So there was a lot happening, emotionally, but that was, was 10 days after losing him that we gathered for Christmas. So
you lost your dad on Christmas Eve. Is that right?
Yes.
How did that color that whole holiday?
I was 8. I was 8 when my father died. And that particular year was completely filled with losing him. And we were all decorated and ready for Christmas, and on Christmas Day we unwrapped the gifts that we had wrapped for him and took them out from under the tree, and it was very solemn. It was very solemn. And in retrospect, as an adult and having had all the experiences that I've had since, and being a counselor and a person of spirit, and now I wish that we hadn't tried to do Christmas as Christmas. I think it just personally, everyone has a different way of managing. For some people, continuing to have your holiday is helpful. But I think for me, as I said, to be real about things is more important than to try to force something to happen. And one of the things I counsel people is just to listen to themselves, to listen to their intuition and their heart, to decide what works for you. As I say, if Christmas is going to help you and celebrating is going to be helpful and lift you and hold you because you're maintaining a tradition, then by all means do it. But if you would just rather skip over it completely and just wish you didn't have to think about it or buy the gifts or be there or show up at the dinner table, then don't. Because this is a sacred time. If you've lost someone or you've had a major loss in your life in some way, it is a sacred time. It is a momentous time of change and disruption. And I think it's important to acknowledge that and honor that and say, this is a really hard time for me. This is a life-changing experience that I've gone through. And it's okay that you're not your same old self. Why? How could you possibly be your same old self?
One of the things that I thought was interesting in the book is you talk about how you weren't crying altogether when you lost your dad. Your mom wasn't crying with you. Is that right?
That's right.
And then how you will share your emotions with your children or the people around you. Talk to me a little bit about that, because I think parents can get really protective and think they're doing the right thing by being strong. Talk to me a little bit about why that makes the difference, is letting your kids experience a little bit of your emotion.
Well, I think the key is a little bit, again, and to be age appropriate. So when I lost my mother 6 years ago, my children were little. They were in grade school. And so they kind of got what was happening. They understood that she had died and wasn't coming back. But they didn't have a lot of personal emotion about that. And I did. And I couldn't, I am an emotive person. And so I didn't try not to cry in front of them. But crying, one of the things I want to say is that crying is different than falling apart. Okay. I would cry and maybe hold my daughter or hold my son and say, I'm really sad today. I'm really missing my mama. I'm really missing her. And that's okay. It's okay that I'm missing her, and it's okay that I'm sad, and I'm okay. I let them know that verbally, I'm okay and I'm sad.
And then they don't have to worry about any kind of fear with whether you're okay.
They don't have to worry about it, because kids know, we all know when someone we love, we know, we feel the energy, we see the face, we feel the mood, we see what's happening in the house, we hear the parents talking. So it's important to acknowledge this has happened and I'm having feelings about it, and it's okay. And you don't need to worry about, you don't need to take care of me. It's okay. And I was still functioning. I was still making dinner. I was still tucking them in. I was still doing the things that getting them to school. I was still keeping up with things, and I was expressing emotion. And that's just me, because I'm an emotional person. Not everyone is as emotional. But if you are, I think it's important to know that you can do that with your children. And you can talk to them, just talk with them. Just talk with them and ask how they're feeling and listen to what they say.
You mentioned you were still able to get them to do all their things. I'm sure there are parents going through immense amounts of grief who are falling short of the things, of getting them to the places. What would you advise them?
I would advise them to ask for help. I would advise them to cut back on many things they can cut back on. Your children will be okay if they don't do this or that or the other thing. They're not even going to remember in a few years. And it's really okay. So again, it's giving yourself permission not to try to keep up. When I was able to, it wasn't what I was doing at that particular time. It wasn't a burden for me. But if it is a burden for someone, they need to give themselves that permission and to ask for help from a friend to help them out, support them.
You have, you talk about asking yourself good questions as part of the grieving process and moving through the grieving process. I think it's part of the flow. Am I remembering that correctly?
It's, well, certainly part of the flow, and it's part of that moving into the new life. It's not necessarily in the midst of your mourning period. Okay. Deep grief. But asking yourself good questions is something that comes when you've moved through quite a bit of your grief, and you're starting to kind of feel like your feet are getting back on the ground. And to be able to ask what I call a very good question is really a question about, I wonder what this event means for my life.
Mm-hmm.
If let's just say for a moment that what happened to you is meaningful in some way, what would that meaning be? It's a big question. It's not a question you can necessarily answer immediately.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a very spiritual question, actually. If something momentous happens to you, let's say you've lost your job because of the economic changes from COVID, you can just say, well, that really sucks. And now what am I going to do? And this is terrible and awful. And oh my God. And you can go into fear or anger. Or you can say, what if this is part of the unfolding of my life? What if this is meaningful? And if that were true, then what might else be happening here? Maybe, for instance, I have a very good friend who lost a job of 20 plus years because of COVID and the shutdown of his particular business. And he loved it. He loved his work. And it was also true that his work was getting a little stale for him. Mm-hmm. But it was a good job, good position in his field. But this has forced him to sit back and say, I have a lot of dreams that I never gave any energy to. I guess this is the moment. What if he didn't put this question, but I'm putting this question toward his situation? What if this is meaningful? What if this is life moving me to the next part of my life, to something bigger, to something that's going to stretch me, that's going to open up my gifts and talents? Mm-hmm. It's going to take me to new experiences, to new people. What if this is meaningful? Then what happened to you that felt so awful and that caused you so much pain now is producing a treasure. Mm-hmm. Is now opening your heart, is now opening your creativity. So, again, this isn't the question you ask the week that something happens, right? Because you need to process. But down the road, this is the part of, I work with people on two levels. One is in the acute grief of helping people to navigate it, because that's a lost art in our culture. Mm-hmm. Of knowing what's normal, knowing how to be, knowing you can give yourself permission, all these kinds of things. That's the first part, is working through navigating the grief itself. But the second part's the really juicy part. The second part is, well, who are you now? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And where is life taking you?
And it's the what's in it for you part. It's the gifts of the grief.
Yes.
Is it possible, and I know you can speak from experience here, is it possible to be asking yourselves those questions of, how did this matter to me? How does this move me forward, when it is the loss of a person and someone that you loved and love?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's helpful if one doesn't frame it as an either or. I've had this horrible thing and now I'm supposed to think it's a great thing because it's moving me somewhere. No, it's horrible. It feels horrible. It's painful. And it's not an or, it's an and. And I believe, and this is just my particular belief system, as a wonderful client of mine calls it, my BS, my belief system. Everyone has a BS. My BS is that life is not random. My particular BS is that life is meaningful. So when I have a great loss, I feel my feelings. I have grief. I have sadness. I have fear, anger. And I'm also having this higher awareness that this is meaningful in my life. And so I'm keeping a little bit of an eye and ear open as I move through my days to see what's wanting to come in, to see where I'm being led. I would not be doing the kind of work I'm doing or writing the books that I'm writing had I not gone through multiple losses early in life.
Mm-hmm. And I am so glad that you have written this, because this is such a good roadmap for so many people. I think it's going to bring a lot of awareness to the whole situation of grief, especially for people who are right in the middle of it. And I think a lot of people are. I will link the link to get the book in show notes. One of my favorite things was early on, and really is something I needed to hear. Let me see if I can find it really quickly. You wrote, "Death in this country is feared. It is seen as a defeat, an insult to life. In fact, death is viewed as the opposite of life, which is utterly ridiculous since death is a normal, natural, and necessary part of life. And just to wet your whistle, I'm going to come right out and say it. Death is not the end of life. It can mark the end of life as we knew it, but that's a very different thing. Death is not the opposite of life because there is no opposite of life. Life is everything. Death, my friend, is the opposite of birth." End quote. You put this early on, and I can tell that this is something you wanted people to know. Why did you want to put this in the book? Why do you want people to know that statement?
Because I think it is the key to acceptance. It is key to understanding that death is a part of life. It's normal, it's natural, it happens in multiple ways. In fact, it happens every day. And I don't mean giant losses, but the cells of our bodies are dying and turning over every day. We're aging every single day. We don't tend to think of it that way as we're, in normal times in our lives. But I put it in early because it took me a long time to get there myself, because I was fighting against all of this loss and death and just feeling, poor me, and life is so hard and this is all so terrible. And I think as I grew older and I worked my own therapy and I worked my own spiritual path for a long, long time, it became really clear to me. And nature is one of my great teachers, of just looking and watching the cycles. And it's always a life, birth, life, death, rebirth. It's in a constant cycle. And in this culture, we tend to see things in a line. You're born and you live and you die, and that's it. But nature shows us otherwise. Things come back, and they come back in a new form often. But I think it's so important for acceptance and for peace, inner peace, and understanding and embracing this truth, this reality, that death is not at all the end. And I think that gives a great deal of hope. I think it gives a great deal of inspiration. And, you don't have to have any religious or spiritual belief. You can just look around and see all around us. This is the reality of the world that we're in, that things do not disappear forever. They come back in new form.
I love that. I've been doing a lot of gardening this 2020, and I've seen that nonstop outside. I've seen it with the trees right now. And thank you so much for coming on and for your insight. The last question I like to ask is, my podcast is about finding more joy in the everyday, in the good, the bad, and the in-between. What is your tip to doing this, to finding more joy, knowing that sometimes it's okay not to have joy? I'm going to still ask.
That's true. Well, I think the ability to embrace what is for you is what leads to joy. I think the ability to be with your sadness, to be with your grief in the time that it's happening, is what facilitates coming into a deeper joy when you come through. So what I mean by that is there's nothing quite like loss to heighten your awareness of beauty and love and goodness when you get it, because you know that things are passing. There's a deep awareness when you go through major loss that you don't get to hold on to things forever. And that's what makes it all so precious and beautiful. And it really heightens your ability to have joy when you can also have your grief. So I would say that would be my long-term answer. And my short-term answer would be to look around and find something beautiful or for which you are grateful every single day.
I love that. Thank you so much for
when
coming.
you're in grief. Even when you're in grief, you can have joy knowing that you had great love. Or that it's a sunny day, or whatever, or that you can breathe, whatever. And that is also part of joy.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciated talking to you. I, again, appreciate this book so much, probably even more just at this time in my life, but it's so good. Many of my family members are going to be getting this for Christmas. So thank you.
Danielle, thank you for having me.
I hope you appreciated this conversation. I've said it only a handful of times, I think only one other time on the podcast, that this is one of those books that I just wish I were Oprah so I could buy a copy for all of you. I'm not Oprah, so I can't. But I highly suggest if this spoke to you, go check out this book. I'm putting the Amazon link to get the book in my show notes. You just go click on it and it will take you right there. And I will also post Katherine's website as well. I want to thank you guys so much for being here on Happiness in Progress.